Welcome to another edition of Glimpses of a Glorious Past, an informal history of the Lawrence School Lovedale. In the last episode, we saw how Major E.J. Nichols organized the Toy Soldiers Parade for the first time in school during Founders of 1953. His passing away left a huge void that was hard to fill. He had been one of the pillars of school since he joined as military instructor on 2nd Mint from the Somerset Light Infantry in 1936. Another British member of staff who stayed on post-independence and helped Saji Nichols in many ways was Mr. Harold Arthur Victor Prince, the bandmaster. Mr. Prince was born in London on January 5, 1897. He spent much of his early career in the British Army, where he served in both the World Wars. He was a sergeant in the Wessex Regiment, stationed in undivided India when he left the army. He then took up service with the Nizam of Hyderabad. Later, he joined the Lawrence Memorial Royal Military School as bandmaster in January 1945. He was succeeded as the bandmaster in 1958 by his son, Denzel Prince, who had been head boy in 1954. The senior Mr. Prince continued to teach students the violin and was involved in the Western Orchestra till he left school in 1967. He then migrated to Canada, where he lived until he passed away in Montreal on February 15, 1984.
Mr. Denzel Prince, the former school bandmaster for many years, shared with us how the Western Orchestra came into being and flourished at Lovedale. The headmaster since 1915, Mr. K.I. Thomas, was keen that the school should have a Western orchestra. This idea appealed to Mr. H.V. Prince, who was a violinist himself. He gradually built a small team of violinists, including children from inter and junior classes who studied for the Trinity College of Music examinations. Some members of the brass and reed sections of the band were then drafted into the orchestra. After their initial successes at school, Mr. Prince felt the orchestra was ready to play to larger audiences. He found a great benefactor in His Highness the Maharaja Jai Chamarajendra Wadiyar of Mysore. He was an accomplished pianist and known the world over as a connoisseur and patron of Western classical music. Our orchestra spent a week in Mysore practicing with the Maharaja's famous Mysore Symphony Orchestra. Mr. De Vries, their lead violinist, knew Mr. Prince as his children were studying in Lovedale. He was of particular help to Mr. Prince, guiding him on the finer points of how a symphony orchestra was organized and conducted. Led by Mr. H.V. Prince, the school orchestra had the honor of performing at a large function held to celebrate the Maharaja's birthday. They played the opening song, Happy Birthday, Your Highness, first played as an instrumental and then sung. Our orchestra also sang and played Now Is the Hour. As a finale, Denzel played Silver Bells solo on the Glockenspiel, which was greatly appreciated. The name and fame of our orchestra spread thereafter, leading to invitations from the Raj Bhavan at Ooty to play at special functions held there.
I remember senior Mr. Prince with great fondness. He had kind of retired from active participation in school functions, but he still kept in touch with what was going on, and he particularly helped with the Western Orchestra. Princey, that's Mr. K.I. Thomas, bought records of famous songs of those years. He requested that selections be played during the school play, prize distribution and other functions. Mr. Prince contacted Furtados in Bombay and Reed and Company in Secunderabad for the piano scores of these pieces. He then stayed awake till 11:30 at night, writing out by hand parts for each of these instruments in the orchestra. He would report to the band room at 6:15 sharp for trooping, the color practice or band practice, and then have orchestra practice from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. The reward for Mr. Prince was the progress of the orchestra he nurtured and the thunderous applause that performances got wherever they played in the Nilgiris. Our school orchestra was often invited to play at Raj Bhavan by successive governors of Madras. They played before dignitaries like Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the Prime Minister of India, Dr. Zakir Hussain, then Vice President of India, and various governors of Madras. These included the Maharaja of Mysore, who was very pleased to see how the orchestra he had seen from his infancy had blossomed over the years. I used to play the violin, and we sometimes went to Mr. Prince's home where Mrs. Prince, Ma Prince, used to take lessons for us in the violin. After the lessons, Mr. Prince would call us into his workshop where he used to have lots of electronic gadgets that he had built himself, particularly motors and generators, small things, and he used to switch them on and show us how they worked. And he also had things that you could hold with your hands next to these on one of these motors, and he would pass a small electric current through you. It was okay when it was 2-3 volts, but I used to give up. Hands used to kind of come together when it got to about 12-13 volts. It was good fun. In the when we went for the performances in the Raj Bhavan and so on, we used to play some of the really popular songs of the day, or popular tunes of the day. O Sole Mio, La Paloma, Theme from a Summer Place. Whenever we played Theme from a Summer Place, there were always requests for encores of the same tune. We used to enjoy that. We had a really nice, what can I say, kit for the orchestra with a bright red sash around the waist, and we used to have to come back. I'm not sure whether we got food. I can't remember whether we did, but perhaps we did. On the way back in the bus, we would start singing songs, and our favorite was "She'll be coming down the mountain when she comes," and we always had the last line as the Lovedale girls are "Kippy, aye, yippee, yippee, aye."
In 1969 and 70, when I was a drummer for the orchestra, we played at the Raj Bhavan twice each year and once at the Ooty Racecourse for a gala event by the organizers of the Ooty races. Being a member of the school's Western Orchestra was both a privilege and an uplifting experience. In the same manner as the best athletes and players were selected for the school teams, selection to the school orchestra classified one as a better musician than the rest. Mr. Denzel Prince's highly disciplined but amiable teaching made orchestra practice most enjoyable. An added bonus were the impromptu jam sessions that often occurred after regular orchestra practice.
On his return from a trip to Delhi where he witnessed the beating retreat, Mr. K.I. Thomas tasked the princes, father and son, with a challenging assignment. Lovedale too would have a beating retreat during Founders, he decreed. You can imagine the work involved, but the princes pulled it off. The first beating retreat in 1962-63 had only the brass band and was 30 minutes long. Over the years, the solemn function grew in terms of number of participants and events performed. In his last beating retreat, Mr. Denzel Prince recalls they had over 100 participating bandsmen in the brass band and 2 drum and bugle bands. Even to this day, decades later, Beating Retreat at Lovedale remains a poignant finale to the Founders' celebrations each year. We Laurentians have much to thank the Princes for all that they did for school. For many OLs from the 1950s to the 1970s, martial music and the strains of the orchestra bring back memories of Mr. H.V. Prince and Mr. Denzel Prince. Dr. K.V. Venugopal, who was in Lovedale from 1950 to 1955 in a Ravli house, shared these thoughts about Mr. H.V. Prince.
Apart from being a good musician, Mr. Prince was a very good actor and he was also a good director. We presented 2 operas during his time. One was Mikado and the other was Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. In Mikado, he coached up each and every single individual, especially the chief ones, Yum Yum and Nanki Poo. In Alibaba and 40 Thieves, he went to the minutest details. He even showed how the oil should be poured into the jar by a beautiful song, Oil, Oil, Beautiful Oil. And that song still reverberates in my mind. That's we have very, very pleasant school memories, our school days. Regarding our training at Lovedale, I think our training stood us in good stead throughout our career. In my case, when I was a young captain posted to Kargil, a high altitude area, and the temperatures dipped below 40 to 45 degrees centigrade. And the working operations were above 11,000 feet above sea level. There were no heaters to heat us, only Bukharis were used to heat us. And we stood the climate well because of my training in Lovedale. My training in Lovedale stood me in good stead in my medical education too. Right from the anatomy days of dissecting dead bodies, right up to the house surgery where we could treat individual patients. Our training at Lovedale stood me in really good stead. And whenever we are in dangers and difficulties, we always used to think of our school motto, never give in. Before I conclude, I would like to play a few notes of our school song, Never Give In. Please join me. Thank you.
With this, we come to the end of another episode of Glimpses of a Glorious Past, an informal history of the Lawrence School Lovedale. Thanks for watching. If you would like to contribute in any way to Glimpses, please email olalovedale@gmail.com with the subject line for Team Glimpses. Thank you.